The most dangerous person in the room is rarely the one making the loudest noise. It is the one who has nothing left to prove. Emily Carter stood behind the velvet curtain, listening to the gentle melody of a string quartet drifting through the Grand Lexington Ballroom in downtown Boston. Nearly 300 guests filled the elegant room beneath crystal chandeliers, their conversations blending with the soft clinking of glassware as volunteers made final preparations for the biggest fundraising gala in the history of the Carter Foundation. Every place setting held a handwritten thank you note. Every table centerpiece had been assembled by student volunteers. Every dollar pledged that evening would provide scholarships, school supplies, and mentoring programs for children whose futures depended on opportunities most people took for granted. Emily adjusted the sleeve of her navy evening gown and quietly reminded herself that tonight had never been about recognition. It had always been about keeping a promise she made 6 years earlier to children who deserved a better beginning than life had given them. The chairman smiled and nodded toward the stage. It was time. Emily stepped into the spotlight as warm applause welcomed her to the podium. She had barely placed her prepared remarks on the lectern when the ballroom doors suddenly opened with enough force to silence nearly every conversation. Heads turned together. Camera phones slowly rose above dinner tables. A man in a charcoal suit walked confidently down the center aisle with the unmistakable expression of someone who believed he still belonged in a life that had long since moved on. Ryan Coleman never slowed his pace. He climbed the stage without invitation, gently moved the microphone away from Emily, and smiled at the stunned audience as though he had been scheduled to speak all along. Before anyone donates another dollar tonight, he announced, I think everyone deserves to know who really built this foundation. The room fell completely silent. Emily looked directly at Ryan, neither frightened nor angry. She simply waited. Ryan reached into a leather briefcase and placed a thick folder on the podium. Between them. He tapped it with one finger before looking back at the audience. Everything she has is built on ideas we created together, he continued. I am asking for $500,000 tonight. If she pays me, I walk away. If she refuses, everyone here gets to see what she has been hiding. A wave of uneasy whispers spread across the ballroom. Several major donors exchanged uncertain glances. One woman quietly lowered the pledge card she had been preparing to sign. Emily recognized nearly every face in the room, and she could see doubt beginning to replace confidence. Even so, she refused to interrupt him. Ryan interpreted her silence as surrender. He smiled wider and slowly opened the folder just enough for the front tables to glimpse papers covered with signatures and highlighted passages. I brought proof, he said confidently. Not opinions. Proof. Emily finally stepped toward the microphone. Her voice remained calm. Ryan, if you have a disagreement with me, then speak to me after the gala. Please do not use these children as leverage for something that belongs in the past. Ryan laughed softly. You still do not understand. Tonight is not about the children. He leaned closer until only a few feet separated them. Tonight is about what you owe me. Then, without asking permission, he walked away from the stage, crossed the ballroom, and lowered himself into the single empty chair reserved at the front of the room, lifting the folder onto his lap with quiet satisfaction while every eye followed him, unaware that the owner of that seat had just stepped through the ballroom entrance. 6 years earlier, there had been no chandeliers, no orchestra, and certainly no ballroom filled with influential donors waiting to applaud. There had only been a small public library on the south side of Boston, a folding table with scratched metal legs, 3 borrowed chairs, and a cardboard box filled with donated children's books that Emily Carter had carried from the trunk of her aging silver sedan because she could not afford to rent a delivery van. The entire budget for her first community reading program had been less than $1,000, and every receipt was carefully stored inside a worn blue binder because she knew that trust would have to be earned one careful decision at a time. She had not started the foundation to prove anyone wrong. She had started it because too many children she met through volunteer work believed their dreams ended where their neighborhoods began. Ryan Coleman had once promised he believed in that mission. During the early days, he talked about changing lives, building partnerships, and creating opportunities together. Emily believed every word because she measured people by their promises instead of their patterns. Slowly those promises began changing. Ryan stopped attending volunteer events and less reporters were present. He became more interested in wealthy sponsors than struggling families. Conversations about helping children slowly became conversations about expanding influence, attracting attention, and finding ways to make the organization financially valuable. Emily refused every suggestion that moved the mission away from the students they had promised to serve. Their disagreements grew until one morning she discovered that money they had saved together had been redirected into a risky private investment Ryan insisted would make them successful much faster. The investment collapsed within months, taking nearly everything Emily had spent years saving. She walked away carrying one suitcase, a few personal belongings, and enough determination to begin again without resentment. She rented a tiny office above a neighborhood bakery where the smell of fresh bread drifted through the floorboards every morning before sunrise. She answered every telephone call herself, wrote grant applications late into the night, packed donated backpacks on weekends, and personally drove across Massachusetts delivering supplies because hiring employees remained impossible. She never spoke publicly about Ryan or blamed him for her circumstances. Whenever someone asked why she had started over alone, she simply smiled and redirected the conversation toward the children receiving help instead. Over time, teachers began recommending families to her programs. Local businesses quietly donated supplies. Volunteers returned again and again because Emily thanked everyone, from corporate executives to custodians, with exactly the same sincere appreciation. One rainy Saturday afternoon, after a community literacy event ended, every volunteer hurried home before the weather became worse. Emily remained behind stacking chairs, sweeping the classroom floor, and placing leftover books back onto library shelves. She noticed a well-dressed stranger carrying 2 heavy boxes toward the exit and politely asked whether he would mind leaving them beside the donation table before he went home. The man smiled, nodded without introducing himself, and quietly did exactly as she requested. Emily thanked him warmly, wished him a safe drive through the rain, and continued cleaning without asking his name, never realizing that years later, the memory of that ordinary afternoon would become the reason someone unexpectedly chose to stand between her reputation and the person now trying to destroy it. The memory disappeared as quickly as it had surfaced, and Emily found herself standing beneath the bright ballroom lights once again while hundreds of uncertain eyes moved between her and Ryan Coleman. The elegant room that had been filled with optimism only minutes earlier now carried the uncomfortable silence of people waiting to discover which version of the truth deserved their trust. Ryan rested comfortably in the reserved chair, one hand draped across the thick folder on his lap as though he had already claimed victory. He slowly opened the cover and removed several neatly organized documents, holding them high enough for the nearest tables to see. "You wanted proof," he said with quiet confidence. "Here it is." He walked back toward the stage without rushing, carefully placing the first page beneath the document camera connected to the ballroom's large projection screens. Within seconds, a scanned agreement appeared above the audience. Emily's name was visible near the bottom of the page. Ryan's name appeared near the top. A murmur swept through the room. Several donors leaned forward to read more closely while others exchanged uneasy glances. Ryan smiled, sensing the uncertainty spreading exactly as he had planned. "This proposal was the beginning of everything," he declared. "We built this vision together. Without me, there would not be a foundation standing here tonight." Emily studied the projected page without changing her expression. She recognized the document immediately. She had signed it years ago, but something about it felt wrong. One sentence near the middle caught her attention. She remembered writing the original proposal herself, and she knew that particular wording had never existed in the version she reviewed. She did not interrupt. She continued reading. Ryan mistook her silence for defeat. $500,000, he repeated. That is all I am asking. Pay it tonight, and every guest here leaves believing this gala was another great success. One technology executive quietly closed his tablet instead of submitting the seven-figure pledge he had prepared. A married couple who had supported the foundation for years looked at one another with visible concern. Emily understood what was happening. Ryan was not trying to win a legal argument. He was trying to destroy confidence at the exact moment trust mattered most. She stepped toward the microphone once again. Everyone in this room deserves complete transparency, she said calmly. Every financial record, every annual audit, and every legal filing connected to this foundation has always been available for review. If anyone wishes to examine them tonight, you will have full access. Ryan laughed softly. Transparency, he replied. Then explain your signature. Emily looked directly at the enlarged document one final time before meeting his eyes. I will, she answered. But first, I would like everyone to notice something much smaller than my signature. Ryan's smile faded for only an instant before returning. He believed she was searching for excuses. She was not. She was searching for a date. Before she could say another word, the ballroom doors opened once more, and the measured sound of polished shoes crossing marble floors drew every head toward the entrance as the man who owned the reserved chair quietly walked inside. The conversations stopped one by one as the stranger continued walking through the ballroom with unhurried confidence, never looking left or right despite every eye following him. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit without a single visible logo or decoration, yet the atmosphere changed before anyone spoke his name. The general manager of the hotel straightened immediately. The chairman of the foundation quietly stepped away from the podium. Two attorneys seated near the front row rose from their chairs at almost the same moment. Emily watched the man approach with a mixture of curiosity and recognition she could not explain. She had never met him, yet something about his calm presence felt strangely familiar. Ryan remained comfortably seated in the reserved chair, crossing one leg over the other as though the unexpected arrival meant nothing. He flashed a confident smile toward the audience and slowly closed the folder resting on his lap. Looks like we have another guest, he said with a quiet laugh. Hopefully he enjoys honesty. The stranger finally stopped beside the chair. For several long seconds he said nothing. His eyes moved briefly from Ryan to the folder, then toward Emily, whose expression remained steady despite everything that had unfolded. He gave her a small respectful nod before returning his attention to Ryan. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm enough that nobody expected the words to carry across the silent ballroom, yet every guest heard them clearly. You are sitting in my seat. Ryan looked up with amused disbelief before glancing at the empty place card beside the chair. Interesting, he replied. I do not see your name anywhere. The stranger did not react. That changes nothing, he answered. Ryan leaned back even farther. Then perhaps you should find another seat. There are plenty available. No one laughed. The stillness inside the ballroom became almost tangible. The hotel general manager carefully stepped forward and cleared his throat. Sir, he said respectfully while addressing Ryan, that chair has been reserved for Mr. Vincent Moretti every year since this event was established. The name moved through the room in quiet whispers. Some guests recognized it immediately. Others reached for their phones before stopping themselves, realizing that everyone who truly mattered already understood exactly who had arrived. Emily searched Vincent's face, trying to remember where she had seen those steady eyes before, but the memory remained just beyond reach. Ryan forced another smile, although it arrived noticeably slower than before. Well, he said, if Mr. Moretti is important enough to deserve a special chair, then I am sure he is also interested in seeing these documents. He lifted the folder and gently tapped its cover. I have evidence that this entire foundation began with both our names. Vincent looked at the folder without touching it. Evidence deserves careful examination, he replied. So does the person presenting it. Then he turned toward the chairman of the foundation. Before anyone reaches another conclusion tonight, I would like every page displayed exactly as it exists, including the information most people never think to examine. Emily noticed Ryan's confident expression flicker for the first time that evening as his fingers tightened around the folder, while somewhere deep inside her memory, the sound of rain striking library windows returned with unexpected clarity. The chairman gave a silent nod to the foundation's technical director, who immediately connected Ryan's folder to the ballroom projection system. The enormous screen suspended above the stage illuminated with the first scanned page while hundreds of guests watched without speaking. Vincent Moretti remained standing beside the reserved chair, his hands relaxed at his sides, never attempting to take the folder away or interrupt the presentation. Emily noticed something remarkable. He was not trying to protect her by stopping Ryan. He was making certain everyone saw exactly what Ryan wanted them to see. Ryan mistook that confidence for surrender. "Excellent," he said with renewed energy. "Now everyone can judge for themselves." The first document filled the screens. It was an early proposal for an educational outreach program, bearing both Ryan's name and Emily's signature. A low murmur spread across the ballroom. Ryan smiled as several guests leaned forward to study the page more closely. "There it is," he declared. "Her signature. She cannot deny it anymore." Emily never looked away from the screen. "I have never intended to deny my signature," she answered calmly. "I signed many proposals while building community programs." Ryan laughed triumphantly. "Then we finally agree on something." Vincent spoke before anyone else could respond. "Continue displaying every page exactly as it appears. Do not enlarge the signatures. Show the entire document." The technical director followed the instruction. As the pages advanced, every margin, footer, and heading became visible instead of only the highlighted sections Ryan had intended to emphasize. Vincent's attention remained fixed on the screen. "Now," he said evenly, "please open the document properties." Ryan frowned. "What difference does that make?" Vincent did not answer him. The technician navigated through the digital file until a small information panel appeared beside the document. Most guests could not immediately understand what they were seeing, but several attorneys exchanged quick glances. Emily felt her heartbeat slow rather than quicken. This was the detail she had noticed but had not yet spoken aloud. Ryan folded his arms, attempting to appear unconcerned. "Technical information proves nothing." Vincent finally looked toward him. "Sometimes it proves everything." The technician quietly read the metadata displayed on the screen. "Original creation date," he announced. The room waited. 8 months after the Carter Foundation was legally incorporated. A wave of whispers swept across the ballroom. Ryan's confident smile stiffened, though he quickly recovered. "Files are copied all the time," he replied. "That means absolutely nothing." Vincent nodded once. "Perhaps. Continue." The technician displayed another information panel. The editing history appeared beneath the creation date. Several revisions had been made over multiple weeks, each carrying timestamps that occurred long after the foundation had already begun operating publicly. Emily recognized the original proposal immediately. It had once been a simple application for a neighborhood literacy partnership. The ownership language Ryan had relied upon tonight had never existed in the version she signed. She remembered that because she had personally written every original paragraph herself. The ballroom remained completely silent as the technicians continued revealing one detail after another, and for the first time since entering the gala, Ryan stopped looking at the audience and began watching the screen with the same uneasy attention as everyone else. Ryan quickly straightened his shoulders as the whispers continued spreading through the ballroom. "Metadata can be manipulated," he said with forced confidence. "Anyone who understands computers knows that." Several guests nodded uncertainly, but the attorneys near the front remained focused on the projected documents instead of Ryan's explanation. Vincent Moretti neither challenged nor dismissed the statement. Instead, he calmly asked the technician to display the next file. One document can raise questions, Vincent said evenly. A complete history usually answers them. The screen changed again. This time, an archived email thread appeared beside the proposal. Every message carried a verified timestamp preserved by the independent cloud archive used by the Foundation since its earliest days. The technician carefully scrolled to the first exchange. Emily immediately recognized it. She had written the message herself years ago while working late above the neighborhood bakery. Her words were simple. She thanked volunteers for reviewing a literacy grant and attached the original proposal before submitting it to local school districts. Ryan's name appeared nowhere in the conversation. Neither did the ownership language now displayed in his printed folder. The technician continued scrolling. Another email appeared from a volunteer attorney recommending minor grammatical corrections before filing the application. Again, the attached draft matched Emily's memory rather than Ryan's version. The room remained completely silent except for the quiet sound of pages changing across the enormous screens. Ryan stepped toward the stage. "Those are different drafts," he insisted. The final agreement came later. Emily finally spoke, her voice remaining gentle despite the growing tension. "Then let us continue until we reach the final version." Vincent gave a slight nod. "Exactly." The technician opened the final archive submission delivered to the state charity registry before the foundation officially launched. Every page matched the proposal Emily remembered writing. Every paragraph appeared exactly as she had drafted it. Every signature rested beneath language devoted entirely to educational programs, financial transparency, and public accountability. The controversial ownership clause Ryan had displayed simply did not exist. A retired federal judge seated near the front quietly adjusted his reading glasses before requesting permission to examine the projected records more closely. After several moments, he leaned back and folded his hands. "These archived filings appear internally consistent," he observed calmly. "The language presented earlier is absent throughout the official submission history." Ryan immediately pointed toward the printed folder still resting on the podium. "Then explain my copy." Vincent answered without raising his voice. "That is precisely what everyone here is beginning to do." Emily watched Ryan carefully. His confidence had not completely disappeared, but it had become noticeably more fragile. He no longer addressed the audience with easy certainty. Instead, he repeatedly glanced toward the folder as though searching for something that had quietly slipped beyond his control. Then the technician enlarged one final detail from the disputed document. Hidden in the lower corner was the identification number assigned automatically by the editing software. The number matched a document created years after the charity had already completed multiple audited fiscal years. Nobody spoke. Nobody applauded. The ballroom simply absorbed the unmistakable timeline in complete silence, while Ryan slowly realized that the evidence he had carried into the gala was no longer pointing toward Emily at all, but was beginning to point directly back toward the person who had chosen to present it. No one hurried to fill the silence because the silence itself had become the strongest voice in the room. Ryan slowly closed the folder that had entered the ballroom like a weapon of certainty but now rested in his hands like a collection of unanswered questions. The confidence that had carried him onto the stage only minutes earlier had been replaced by careful calculations, as though he were searching for another explanation before the audience reached its own conclusion. Emily remained beside the podium without celebrating, without smiling, and without saying a single word that could be mistaken for triumph. She understood something Ryan still did not. Restoring trust required patience, not victory. Vincent Moretti glanced toward the chairman of the foundation before turning back to Ryan. "You asked everyone here to examine the evidence," he said calmly. "That request was reasonable. They have done exactly that." Ryan lifted his chin. "You still cannot prove where my copy came from." Vincent nodded once. Perhaps not. He paused for a moment. But tonight was never about proving where your copy came from. It was about determining whether Emily Carter deserved the accusations you attached to it. Several guests quietly lowered the phones they had been holding throughout the confrontation. The retired judge spoke again from the front table. Based on the records presented this evening, I see no reason to question the integrity of the Foundation's official filings. A certified public accountant seated nearby agreed. She explained that every audited financial statement matched the archive submissions displayed on the screen, leaving no indication that Foundation funds or ownership records had been altered. The uncertainty that had settled over the ballroom began dissolving almost as quietly as it had appeared. One by one, donors looked back toward Emily instead of Ryan. The technology executive reopened the pledge form on his tablet. The married couple who had hesitated earlier quietly signed their commitment cards. A longtime volunteer smiled through relieved eyes after realizing the organization she had served for years remained exactly what she believed it had always been. Ryan noticed every one of those small moments. None of them involved applause. None required dramatic speeches. Confidence simply returned to the person who had never abandoned it. Vincent then looked toward Emily with a faint expression of recognition. "Years ago," he said, "during a storm, I carried 2 heavy boxes out of a neighborhood library because a volunteer asked me politely if I could help before I left." Emily stared at him for several seconds before the memory finally settled into place. The rain. The donated books. The quiet stranger she had thanked without knowing his name. Vincent offered a gentle smile. "You thanked me exactly the same way you thanked every volunteer that afternoon. You did not know who I was. You did not ask what I owned. You simply treated me with respect because you believed every person deserved it." Emily lowered her eyes for a brief moment, remembering that ordinary day which had never seemed important until now. Vincent continued, his voice still calm enough that every word carried naturally across the silent ballroom. "People often reveal their character when they believe no one important is watching. That afternoon, I learned everything I needed to know about yours. Tonight, everyone else had the opportunity to learn the same lesson." Ryan looked around the ballroom as though expecting someone to defend him, but no one spoke. The donors who had listened carefully from the beginning were no longer studying the folder in his hands. They were studying the quiet difference between 2 people under pressure. One had arrived demanding money in exchange for silence. The other had stood through accusation after accusation without insulting anyone in return. That contrast required no legal explanation. It was visible to everyone in the room. Ryan slowly gathered the scattered papers from the podium and placed them back inside the folder with movements that had lost all of their earlier confidence. "I believed I deserved recognition," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I invested years of my life in those early ideas." Emily answered with the same steady voice she had maintained throughout the evening. "No one has ever denied that you were present in the beginning. But helping start something does not give anyone permission to rewrite its history." The room remained still. Vincent Moretti stepped toward the chairman of the foundation instead of toward Ryan. "I believe the guests have waited long enough for the purpose of this evening to continue," he said. "Children should not lose opportunities because adults failed to resolve old disappointments with wisdom." The chairman nodded gratefully and invited Emily back to the podium. She paused before speaking, looking across the hundreds of faces that had witnessed every difficult moment. "I do not want tonight to become remembered for conflict," she began. "The students we serve have already experienced enough conflict in their own lives. They deserve a future defined by opportunity instead." She reached into a small folder containing her prepared remarks, then quietly closed it without reading a single page. Instead, she shared the story of a 7th grade student who had entered the literacy program unable to read at grade level but had recently become the first member of his family accepted into an advanced academic summer program. She spoke about teachers who stayed after school without extra pay, retired neighbors who volunteered every weekend, and local businesses that quietly donated backpacks without asking for publicity. As she spoke, the atmosphere inside the ballroom slowly returned to the purpose that had brought everyone together. The technology executive who had hesitated earlier stood first. "The scholarship fund can count on my original pledge," he announced. Applause broke out naturally across the room. Moments later, another donor increased her contribution beyond the amount she had originally planned. Others followed. The digital fundraising display beside the stage began updating every few seconds as new commitments arrived. The total climbed higher than anyone had expected before the evening began. Ryan watched the numbers rise without saying another word. He finally closed the folder completely and held it against his side. Vincent walked toward the reserved chair that had remained empty throughout the entire confrontation, but instead of sitting down, he looked toward a teenage volunteer named Noah Miller, who had spent the evening quietly helping guests find their tables and refill water glasses whenever needed. "Young man," Vincent said with a warm smile, "would you do me the honor of taking this seat for the remainder of the gala? Tonight belongs to the future, not to people arguing about the past." Noah froze in disbelief as the entire ballroom turned toward him, and then, one by one, every guest rose to their feet in quiet respect. No announcement was made to explain why hundreds of distinguished guests remained standing, because no explanation was necessary anymore. Noah Miller hesitated before approaching the reserved chair, looking first toward Emily and then toward Vincent Moretti as though he feared he had misunderstood the invitation. Vincent simply nodded. "Please," he said. "This seat was always meant to honor someone who represents tomorrow." Noah carefully sat down, his hands resting nervously on the edge of the table while the applause slowly filled the ballroom with something far stronger than celebration. It was relief. Emily smiled, not because she had been proven right, but because the evening had finally returned to the children it had always been meant to serve. The chairman quietly announced the updated fundraising total, and another wave of applause followed as the number surpassed every previous gala in the foundation's history. Scholarships that had seemed uncertain only an hour earlier were now fully funded. New mentoring programs would open the following year. Additional reading centers would reach neighborhoods that had been waiting for support. The purpose had survived the distraction. Ryan remained near the side of the ballroom, holding the folder that had once seemed capable of changing everything. After several long moments, he walked toward Emily. The guests instinctively watched, but neither fear nor tension remained in the room. Ryan stopped a respectful distance away. "I cannot change tonight," he said quietly. "But I can stop making it worse." Emily looked at him with the same calm expression she had carried from the beginning. "That choice has always belonged to you," she answered. Ryan lowered his eyes for a moment before placing the folder into the hands of one of the foundation's attorneys for independent review. Without another argument or accusation, he thanked the chairman for allowing the documents to be examined openly and then walked toward the ballroom exit. No one cheered as he left. No one mocked him. The evening had already demonstrated that dignity did not need humiliation to prove its strength. As the orchestra resumed playing, volunteers carried dessert to the tables while conversations slowly returned, this time centered on students, classrooms, and future opportunities instead of controversy. Vincent finally took an ordinary chair near the back of the room instead of the reserved place prepared for him. Emily noticed and walked over to thank him. "You never needed that seat," she said with a grateful smile. Vincent shook his head gently. "Respect is never created by where someone sits," he replied. "It is created by how they treat people when nobody expects them to." Emily remembered the rainy afternoon at the neighborhood library and laughed softly. "I almost forgot about those boxes." Vincent smiled. "I never did." Months later, photographs from the gala appeared in newspapers across Massachusetts, but the image people shared most often was not of influential donors or impressive fundraising totals. It was the simple photograph of a teenage volunteer sitting in a chair once reserved for power while a room full of accomplished adults applauded the future standing quietly before them. The foundation continued growing, not because it had defeated an enemy, but because it had refused to abandon its purpose when tested. And on that unforgettable evening, everyone inside the Grand Lexington Ballroom was reminded that reputation may attract attention, wealth may command influence, and titles may reserve a seat, but only character earns lasting respect, and that night, the world remembered exactly what dignity looks like.